recently there was a song that was released by Jason Aldean. He had this music video he put out there. It's really making the rounds, and there's been a lot of controversy surrounding it. And the song is called Try That in a Small Town. And the whole purpose of the song is basically to say, if you're behaving in the disrespectful ways, which are generally tolerated in large cities, in which we have been told as a population for decades are morally acceptable, you're going to have some trouble in a small town. So the lyrics are cuss out a cop. He's describing doing things that are violent or unacceptable. And then he says, try that in a small town and see how far you make it down the road. We take care of our own here. You cross that line, it won't take long. And, find out, or for you to find out, I recommend you don't. Try that in a small town. So this is a music video where someone's essentially saying, don't come to our town and cause problems. I think it's a great message. There are people in the media who have literally referred to this as a pro-lynching anthem, which is the most bizarre, insane, and ridiculous stretch of an interpretation I could possibly imagine. So this idea that traditionally American values are racist, that wanting to protect your community and your town means that you're in favor of lynching and that we need to abandon our American values is so pervasive that a song like this is criticized, whereas you have gangster rap, which talks about committing actual crimes and harming innocent people and treating women poorly and doing drugs, and the media never decries that.
It looks like these lyrics should have had the word if you cuss out a cop or spit in his face, if you stomp on the flag and light it up, you're going to pay for it in a small town. The way it sounds, stomp on the flag, cuss out a cop, stomp on the flag, you're going to pay for it. It doesn't like have the supposition, so people might be reading into it as if he's telling people to do that stuff.
I don't think that's the problem. They're upset he's saying don't do that, because gangster rap tells people to do horrible things like that all the time, and there's never a controversy.
Right. I think part of the problem is we live in a culture where we're not supposed to expect our neighbors to share values with us. We're supposed to live and let live. And I used to love that phrase when I was younger, right? Because I have these libertarian ideals, and it's not that I don't now, but I think ultimately the fabric of our society is strong when we have a understanding of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So some of the stuff he's describing here, right? Like, don't come to my town and attack law enforcement. And we can have all kinds of debates about law enforcement, but we should all mutually agree that we expect one another to preserve our safety, right? We don't want that as a social contract to be violated. All of these ideas that he's promoting are actually completely reasonable. It's just that he is presenting them in a way that people don't like. And you're not supposed to tell other people, well, you're not supposed to do this. This is against what we're allowed to do. We're supposed to let people live and let live however they see fit, which is just toxic ultimately. Yep. We function the best when we are able to say, I know that my neighbor shares my values and therefore will not look at me and say, well, I'm allowed to do whatever I want and I'm going to.
So I want to ask Vivek how he feels about this and what your response to this song has been, and also just in general the denigration of American values and a national identity and how it's brought us to this point.
Yeah, so I think there's the superficial element of this, which, frankly, others have covered over the course of today as well, which is something I agree with. I said it this morning, is that anytime you have a song that actually celebrates who we really are, something that a majority of Americans, by the way, at least until very recently, the values enshrined in that song would have united all Americans. Mm-hmm. That's actually what is subject to censorship and cancellation, when in fact, songs that glorify violence or other kinds of undesirable behavior are the ones that we actually end up culturally venerating. So there's a bit of a paradox there. I do think there's something deeper going on, and it ties to our earlier conversation in the country, which is this idea of whether we believe in concentric circles of loyalty or not, right? Mm-hmm. The song was about a small town. And I think that we were having a discussion earlier about the community. I mean, how do you take care of yourself or your family before you're solving global poverty in Ethiopia, or whether you're addressing the climate? And I think that that's one of the questions we have to regain alignment on. I think it's an interesting question. I'm offering one view. I'm clearly biased to that view. But I think that there's a legitimate question of saying that, no, we don't necessarily have to solve problems at home before we solve them somewhere else. Or do we actually take care of the problems on our own street? If you're try that in a small town, it's like almost, I'm going to stand for my people first. I'm going to stand for my family first. I'm going to stand for my town first. I'm going to stand for my nation first. Is that the right way to think about our commitments? Or do we have transcendental commitments that go beyond those traditional boundaries somewhere else? And I think that's, in many ways, it's not a right or left question. It's an interesting question to ponder. And I think that that's part of what's going on when we make up these new abstract religions to substitute for the hard thing, which is look in the mirror and ask myself who I am. Actually do something kind for my parents or for my family members or my neighbors. In some ways, Ukraine has actually become a substitute for this, right?
I was just
Ukraine
about to
is a
ask
substitute
you.
religion.
Yeah. I mean, if this song was called Try That in Ukraine, I don't think anyone would be complaining about it.
Exactly. Because what are we trying in Ukraine or Russia? On one hand, last year, the thing that we said, cluster bombs that were going to be war crimes, are now the very things that we will send over to Ukraine. And so it just becomes the reemergence of a new kind of religion.
And we have a new one every couple years. I mean, a couple years ago, we were all posting black squares, and
and there's always a symbol.
There's
to go along with
always
it.
something to it, and it's a test, right? Do you comply? Can I give you an outward symbol that I line up the way that dominant culture wants me to? And I think that's why songs like this are so interesting, is because they make people so. I mean, Variety has this article out saying that it's the most cynical song, when really it's a call to action and mutual protection.
This is, look, if you want to argue there's something wrong with the song, I think you're incorrect, but this is the most cynical song of all the songs on air today, of all the songs on the radio. This is the most cynical. You're out of your mind.
It seems like a psychological, I don't want to be too conspiracy, but it seems like a psychological operation with the internet now. We've got all the nations of Earth influencing our nation. We're all influencing each other, of course, but there are overt applications to corrupt and disband the United States because it's the global leader. And who's seeding this that's a bad thing to protect your neighbors? Who's doing that? Is it the Chinese? I don't want to be crazy conspiracy because I don't know. But who wants the U.S. follow the money? I don't know. But I get a vibe that this is not a natural phenomenon from within our country.
The reaction to this is what you mean.
Yeah.
It's plausible to me. It's almost so bizarre that is a very fair question to ask. In some ways, China is absolutely responsible for a lot of this, right? Because China, the game they have played, I'm going to come back and say that's not the entire explanation, but I think there's a lot of truth to it, though. Because China has played this game on our culture for the last 20 some odd years, which is they want our psychic insecurities to flourish. They want us to be psychologically insecure, and here's how they do it. The spread of global capitalism in the 1990s was actually their way of accomplishing this, where we fell into this trap that said we were going to export Big Macs and Happy Meals, and Western music was a big part of this too, to places like China to spread democracy. That was our vision of democratic capitalism in the 1990s. Bipartisan consensus, by the way, Republicans and Democrats alike. What they realized is, oh, wait a minute. We can use these vehicles as a way to actually spread our values back to them. They thought they could use our money to get them to be more like us. China says, okay, we're going to use access to our market to get America to be more like us. How did that work? What they basically said is you can't enter the Chinese market, be it a music company, a movie company, et cetera. A lot of entertainment fits this description. You can't enter, Disney fits this description. The NBA fits this description. You can't enter the Chinese market unless and until you abide by the CCP's way of doing things. But we will roll out the red carpet if you criticize the United States.
Yeah.
So this idea of self-loathing of large companies, institutions, entertainment institutions in particular, relentlessly criticizing the United States while actually staying silent about the actual human rights atrocities in places like China, that started in some ways as a form of a psyop, right, by China on the United States to say, we're going to get those institutions that you guys venerate over there, many of them are companies or entertainment providers, to relentlessly criticize the U.S. because the more you do that, while also staying quiet in criticism on China, the more they're going to roll out the red carpet for those companies and institutions to be able to expand into the Chinese market, which means more money.
Yeah.
So certainly there was a psyop component to this, but that trick only works if we have a culture that's still willing to buy up what they're selling, which goes back to that earlier absence of purpose and meaning and identity in our culture.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about the fact that the Chinese government has a much better grasp on what is going to tug at the heartstrings and what will upset the sensibilities of the American people, as opposed to the American people's understanding of what is going to upset people in other nations.
Or in our own.
Or in our own. That's a very fair point. One story I usually bring about the Biden administration with respect to how effective I think he's been as a leader on the foreign stage is he told this story. And again, this is him telling this story. He thought this made him look good. The story was he met with Vladimir Putin and he said to Vladimir Putin, "I don't think you have a soul, man." And according to him, Vladimir Putin responded, "We understand each other." Okay, I hear this story and I go, the president of the United States just told a foreign leader who was waging a war that he thinks he's mean. This is not going to upset that foreign leader if this ever even happened. On the other hand, what does China do? China tells the United States of America that the United States of America is racist and needs to apologize for being racist, despite the fact that in order to market a film in China, you have to reduce the size of black characters on the poster. China doesn't care about racism, but they know that the United States has a hyperfixation on it, so they try to manipulate us with it. And you touched earlier on...
They turn our psychic insecurities
against us.
As weapons back against us. And then they use capitalism as a vehicle to enforce it.
Exactly.
Because companies don't get to play ball in China unless they actually carry out that dictate. So it's just the game. It's how they play it.
This is actually why I've loved talking about the 9-dash slide in relation to the Barbie movie. I think so many people are not aware of the subtle games that China plays. So having this line on a map that probably a lot of U.S. students are used to seeing there. But as soon as someone in Vietnam says, hey, by the way, that's actually a claim to land that belongs to us, a bunch of Americans suddenly have to go, oh, wait, I've never ever thought about anything that affects you because I take the information that is provided to me without question. And they have no culture. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why someone in America may not be aware of the territorial map of the South China Sea. On the other hand, how interesting that the Barbie movie is suddenly this thing that calls attention to the subtle claim from China to this historical area.
Yeah. It's fascinating you use the example of a movie. Top Gun, the recent release of Top Gun, had a lot of those attributes to it too, where, I don't know if you guys noticed, but the enemy was some nebulous, vague other nation. We don't know who it is.
With snow.
And by the way, the old Top Gun, the Maverick jacket that had the Taiwan and the Japanese flag on it, in the revised cut of the movie, that had disappeared. In the original cut, it was actually real. In the original movie, it was actually original version. Yeah. There was an actually identified enemy nation. We're talking about the U.S. and USSR, an actual rival. Here, it's a nebulous nation. Why is that? China's first read was that this movie was too patriotic for the U.S. to be played in China. So they come back and make those concessions. So part of that's micro. That's at the at the margin, right? Well, the Japan flag and the Taiwan flag no longer show up. It's a nebulous alternative enemy or rival, as though it was disconnected with the present reality in the United States. Made it slightly less patriotic than it otherwise was. Is it any surprise that you then see the same types of reactions from the same movie industry associations or recording industry associations that then are engaged in self-flogging here in the United States, even as they will expand into the Chinese market without a peep? Yep. So I do think that there is a cynical force at work here, Ian. I think you're totally right about that. But I don't think it's the whole explanation. Right? That just amplifies a deeper insecurity that still existed in the first place.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.